Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Please apologize the longer hiatus from last week. Well, 5 days isn't too long by my standards, but I know some of you have gotten used to almost daily uploads for a while. So I am very glad to be back, but will be a one-off because I'll be taking a smaller 3-day break or so again after this. So I really wanted to stream today. I hope you guys let me know what you think of all the rumors we're going to be covering. I think we are now in the second half of 2024, so I think it's now way more appropriate to be talking again about the iPhone 16 Pro, 16 Pro Max, as we used to call it actually the 16 Ultra, so who knows what happens with that. And I will be summarizing some rumors that, of course, we have talked about, like, for example, the larger main camera, and I will be contextualizing older rumors, like potentially newer batteries, with now the combination of new EU legislation, how that might work with that, either pros or cons, how it might jive with certain rumors about like a steel chassis or a metal chassis for the battery itself. I'll talk a little bit about the A18 Pro chip. We unfortunately haven't gotten any like hardcore new rumors about it, but I think now that we have the M4, it's reasonable to talk about it. I would especially love to talk about it based on the questions you guys might have, right? Whether you believe whether it will have the exact same architecture across CPU, GPU, NPU as the M4, or whether you think it might actually be superior in certain ways. Like, I think, for example, a very good candidate to be superior than the M4 is the neural engine on the A18, because the M4 basically just took the neural engine from the A17 Pro and clocked it a little higher. The M3 was actually inferior to the A17 Pro's neural engine. We don't know always about like FP16 versus integer 8. I'm just going now by Apple numbers to make it a little bit more simple for all of us. And then, of course, we will be talking about a rumor that has been building up somewhat with the iPhone 16 Pro doing another material jump when it comes to its OLED display technology. Usually iPhones these days maintain like the same basic tech for about 2 years. This is why like 15 Pro and 14 Pro perform very similarly in terms of screens. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply to a 13 Pro versus 12 Pro because 13 Pro came with OLED, but it's a slightly different discussion. We are now in an era of diminishing returns. Don't expect all hardware to jump on an annual basis as much as it used to. And we will actually be mentioning a competitor for Apple who definitely will not be doing quite a big jump next year, which is quite a shame because I feel like my excitement for Samsung is dwindling every year. Like the S24, I expected to cover way more in the beginning of this year, but now it seems like the S25 Ultra might actually be significantly less exciting even than that. So that's about my intro for this video. I know I love talking in the intro, but I do want to give you a nice introductory understanding of what is about to come today. It won't be too long of a stream because, as I said, we have talked about multiple rumors in the past. But I do encourage you guys, of course, to come in and chat in the live chat. As always, please subscribe to the channel. It always helps if the community grows. Like the video. Of course, that helps attract people too. Share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. And if you want to support this channel directly while I'm live, you can leave a super chat or a super sticker. You can subscribe to my Patreon. Shout out to Louis God, my MarkTech Pro Max subscriber on Patreon. The Patreon app is weird sometimes. It shows me a certain number of subscribers, then another. I'll just give the shout out where I think it's due. And of course, you can also subscribe to my channel memberships, which are now open on YouTube. I don't know if they're available in all regions through the app. Sometimes on iOS, you cannot subscribe to the channel through the app. So, but if you want to support the channel this way, there's a MarkTech Pro and the MarkTech Pro Max tier there. You can actually do that through the browser. So I apologize for the inconvenience there, but YouTube doesn't like to pay Apple the 30% commission all the time. So, which I understand actually in this case somewhat. So yeah, if you want to support us this way, and shout out to Angelica, who is our first MarkTech Pro Max supporter on YouTube channel membership. So thank you, guys and girls, I guess, for a growing community and a growing amount of direct support. That's always very well appreciated. And as I've said time and time again, it gets reinvested right back into the channel. Also, hello to Riveting Tail Chap, who already is in the live chat, saying you cannot wait to hear my thoughts on this one. Well, it's not this one, it's this several, but I guess it's just the iPhone 16 here that is exciting overall. Looking at my thumbnail, you can obviously see that I've put also the regular iPhone 16 in the thumbnail, and that's because it is the one with the most changed camera design, right? This almost iPhone 10, 10s camera design. That being said, we will not actually be talking that much about the regular iPhone 16 because most of the rumors we are covering today are going to be focusing on the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. So the first one I want to start with is about screens. Now, screens are this kind of thing that are like, they are very, very much good enough these days, right? If you look at even like an iPhone 13 Pro, let's say you're somebody who really, really needs ProMotion, you absolutely cannot live without it, right? It's a great screen. It reaches a very, very respectable peak 1000 nits brightness. Now that's more for outdoor brightness, but still, it gives you very great HDR at above 1000 nits. It gives you 120 hertz ProMotion at between 10 and 120 hertz. So it actually can be significantly more efficient than one might think. And it's great. But of course, we always want more. We always want a reason to upgrade. We always want a reason to like play tech games and compare old gen versus new gen, to compare competitor products with newer products. And the iPhone 16 Pro looks like it will be taking that step forward from the iPhone 14 Pro and 15 Pro series. Now, this is sort of a developing rumor, not in the sense that it's developing right now, but it's that it's been almost developing for a year. And the point is that Samsung has a certain material subset on which they manufacture OLED panels. And obviously, the more advanced the materials are, the better the screen. It can improve things like brightness, longevity, efficiency, color reproduction properties, things like that, basically. Now, the iPhone 16 Pro is rumored to get the M14 generation of materials from Samsung. Now, it should be said, and I say it always whenever I cover like, oh, the iPhone is built on like a TSMC processor. Oh, it has like a Qualcomm modem. Well, granted, with the Qualcomm modem, that's actually more true. But whenever people say like, oh, it's a Samsung screen, it's not. If it was a purely Samsung screen, then LG wouldn't be able to manufacture it regardless of the machines they had, because that would just go against like patents and licensing rights. Apple uses things like materials from Samsung. They utilize Samsung's fabs for display designs. Of course, I'm sure they have some patent sharing agreements across the board so that Apple can sometimes give some stuff to LG from Samsung and vice versa, so they can manufacture the same tech simultaneously for Apple. We see with stuff like tandem OLED that the technology that is very, very much like Apple exclusive for now is technically an LG tech, but then we've also talked about the latest Dell XPS technically having a tandem OLED screen, but instead of doing what the iPad Pro does and using it to make the best screen ever, like the iPad Pro is 120 hertz, 1000 nits, 1600 nits HDR, right? And that Dell XPS gives you 400 nits peak SDR brightness, 500 nits peak HDR brightness, and it's a 60 hertz panel. Right. So you basically have to ask yourself, either Apple has like by far and away the best display controller in the industry, and they're just so much better at utilizing the same screen technology, or the way that Apple is making tandem OLED and is having LG and Samsung manufacture them is significantly better than the base process that these companies are currently offering to other manufacturers, other OEMs. So I just want to always start with that, because people will be like, oh, you see, iPhone 16 Pro is like Samsung powered. And it's like, I think that is actually a recent article on 9 to 5 Google, because the other company that is apparently getting this kind of screen, well, this kind of material from Samsung for its screen, or this kind of material based screen from Samsung, is actually the Google Pixel 9. Now, you guys know that I'm not a huge fan of the Google Pixel, because I was such a huge fan of its initial concept, right? A clean OS, a clean UI, very, very much optimized, because it's the platform holder also designing the hardware itself, not just the software. And I have obviously complimented Google Pixel in the past on certain things. Like, I do like the design of like the camera visor almost. And I do like that for a relatively underpowered processor, the OS definitely feels smooth. Unless you try to actually work with somewhat demanding applications. And sometimes they are fresh to newer technologies, like the Google Pixel 8 actually has very bright screens. When you actually look at how Samsung advertises their screen brightness, you will find that in real world usage, you won't actually come close to that. While on the Pixel 8, they actually are getting close to those advertised 2000 nits brightness. Now, they don't really do that on the Pixel 8 Pro with 2400 nits, but it still gets remarkably close to the iPhone, which is still in many ways industry leading when it comes to full screen brightness at around 1800 nits, which is very close to the advertised 2000 nits. While a lot of like Android manufacturers from China will be talking about like 5,000, 6,000 nit screen, and what we get from that is actually like an HDR rating on a 0.1% part of the screen. I know I'm being a little bit of an asshole here, but like those brightness ratings are so useless. And most HDR like that you will consume on a smartphone, you don't even really want it to hit like those kinds of crazy brightness levels. When it comes to like crazy high stuff, it really matters how well it's like balanced. There's a reason why Apple is maintaining their 1600 nits peak brightness levels for HDR, even if their actual peak brightness for the screen under sunlight is 2000 nits. So one might think, well, if they can do full screen brightness close to 2000, they surely can have like 2000 also in like a 10% window of the screen, or at least like a 5% window. But it's the color science. You actually want the HDR to also be predictable. And Apple obviously has mastery over the control from the display controller to the actual panel, to the OS driving it, to the APIs they are providing to developers to target the iPhone, to, of course, Apple has been involved with many open standards from HTML, H.264, H.265, stuff like that when it comes to video processing text. So yeah, Apple's HDR is absolutely fantastic, but I do want to just give some shout out to Pixel. Not that I hate on it, but the reason why I wanted to briefly mention the Pixel is because people are saying Google Pixel 9 series reportedly uses the same display as the iPhone 16 Pro. Google will utilize an updated M14 OLED panel from Samsung. The new panel is said to be brighter and have an improved lifespan. According to the report, Google will be utilizing this new gen of OLED panels in the new Pixel 9, Pixel 9 Pro, Pixel 9 Pro XL, and Pixel 9 Pro Fold. What the frick is a Pixel 9 Pro Fold? We are getting a Pixel Fold 2. Wait, what? Is that a rebranding of the Pixel Fold? That's such a stupid rebranding. Um, at least then call it Pixel 9 Fold Pro, right? That makes way more sense. Oh, Jesus Christ. Um, and yeah, so people are talking about how basically the iPhone is moving from the M12 generation of materials from Samsung to M14, and Google is basically adopting the same materials. That does not mean, however, what this title is saying. That does not mean it is using the same display. That is absolutely not the case. Now, it will be definitely a good screen because Google also has some of the advantages that I listed. They are the platform holder. They do design the OS, the APIs, things like that. So they actually will have a very good understanding of how to utilize that kind of advanced screen. But I just wanted to say, anybody who claims this is like the same display, we have seen that time and time again. That's not how reality behaves. This is why the Dell XPS that I mentioned, it does not have the same display as the M4 iPad Pro, just because they are both tandem OLED. There is a clear rumor here that I found actually interesting, which is that supposedly this will boost max brightness. Now, this is max brightness in non-outdoor brightness, right? So basically not under sunlight. And this supposedly will give you a boost of 20% to 1200 nits. Now, whether or not that will come with a 10 to 20% brightness increase over the 2000 nits rating for outdoors, that remains to be seen. So if 1000 nits can go up to 20 nits, up to 1200 nits, maybe the 2000 nits for outdoors can go as high as 2400 nits. That being said, we haven't gotten clear specifications like that. And it's not like Apple likes chasing individual specs, right? Because there is a chance that Apple could just say, well, you know what? We will just keep it at 1000 nits, utilize the higher efficiency, and to like reduce heat buildup, to increase battery life. And then we will still allow it to hit like 2200, 2400 nits outdoors. But that's all, that will be left up to the phone in basically in automatic mode. Whenever it registers, there's a lot of outdoor light. There's a lot of light around the phone. It needs to go brighter, but like manually, you can set like the iPhone 15 Pro to 1000 nits. According to this rumor, you will be able to set it at 1200 nits. But I will always try to tell people, Apple does not follow the instructions on the manual. Basically, it's like, it's a 20% more efficient screen, so you better ramp up the brightness by 20% to keep up with the Chinese manufacturers and their bullshit advertisements on screen brightness. This is a rumor, but I'm not sure how reliable this exact part is. It seems like the actual use of M14 material displays is very, very much likely. Now, again, some people have said that it will be like for the entire Google Pixel lineup. I don't know if the supplies are enough. It just so happens that the Google Pixel just sells in such low numbers that Google Pixel 9, Google Pixel 9 Pro, Google 9 Pixel Pro XL, and Google 9 Pixel Fold all combined will actually sell less than these two individual models, individually, right? So this is why is when some people ask, well, why is Apple late sometimes to a certain technology? Well, it's because these iPhones will sell like 100 plus million units combined. The Google Pixel 9 will not, even as its entire family. Yeah, so just some apology, I guess, for Apple, but it's more like actual context, because tech isn't magic, and tech already is like phenomenal as it is. I think the way that tech has improved over the last 50 years is pretty close to magical, and even the pace that we are at in the last 10 years, it's still very impressive. It's not anywhere near the advancements that we used to see, but it's still great. So I just want to tell people, please be excited sometimes. Whenever I see like that meme with the guy like, oh, new iPhone, like same shirt that I like already have on, it's like, yeah, but like then don't buy it, right? Like if your iPhone to you is still so good, they are designed to actually last long. It's not like it breaks like certain tech after 2 or 3 years. Like the battery might have a diminished capacity, but you can like replace it for under $100, and it might get a lot easier when we'll be covering another rumor soon. And I just find it weird how people are like trying to downplay all this stuff, because even stuff like battery, I've seen like people like shit on the battery on the iPhone 14 and 15 Pro, right? Because those are the phones that have like always on displays, and they have incredibly high peak brightness. And I'm telling those people, well, they have about the same battery capacity as the iPhone 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max. If you're gonna ask those phones to do a lot more, right? If you're gonna ask them to be like 20, 30, 40% brighter, if you're gonna ask them to always keep their screens on, that will not give you the same battery life. Efficiency is better already on those phones, but it's not like 50% better to actually allow that kind of improvement. So I just wanted to tell people, like, chill out, actually enjoy what we have. And if you don't need it, don't buy it, but also don't down talk it, right? It's pretty, at least to me, it's still very exciting to know that whenever, like, for example, for me, I'm very likely not upgrading from my 15 Pro to the 16 Pro. The reason why I usually upgrade is both my personal desire, but also whenever I have somebody in my family or friends group who really is like intent on upgrading. Obviously, if it's in the family, I give them my phone for free and buy just myself a new one. With my friends, I give them a good deal and stuff like that. Um, with the 16 Pro this year, nobody I know has a big need of upgrading. Certainly not to my 15 Pro, right? Somebody to my 15 Pro Max. Like I know some people who will be upgrading, but they're very much on the smaller size of the spectrum when it comes to iPhone usage. So yeah, I will most likely be waiting for 17 Pro, which at that point, given that this screen tag is going to be kept around for around 2 years, that means that on the 17 Pro Max or 17 Ultra or whatever, I will be getting probably about the same specs, and I will not be complaining about it because those specs are still superior to my phone, and after a very short period of time, right? So again, not trying to like boost the excitement here artificially, but just trying to tell you there is still a lot of excitement to be had. Like if you're coming from an iPhone 12 series, right? Maybe you bought like the first iPhone with 5G and you thought like, oh, I'm future proofing with this. Well, from the 13 Pro already, you're getting obviously ProMotion, right? Now with the new from the 14 Pro, you're getting always on display and ProMotion actually being extended down to 1 Hertz. You're getting higher peak brightness. Now you will actually be getting even higher peak brightness. Across the board, you're getting also a lot more efficiency. So whenever you're actually using your phone at low brightness or medium brightness, like basically normalizing the use case, well, now you will actually have a lot more battery life, especially over your old and used phone with your older Wi-Fi and 5G antenna, your older, less efficient 5 nanometer processor, things like that. And we aren't even going back all the way to like iPhone 11 series, iPhone 10s series, which there's still a ton out there. And then, of course, with the 16 Pro, there's, of course, also the component that these screens here are not just brighter, more efficient, better than ever, but also the fact that these are 6.3 versus 6.1 and 6.9 versus 6.7-inch displays. I don't know why this article doesn't mention it. Maybe they're just so used to people already knowing it. So not only going from the 12 series, which you get a newer notch on the 13 series, then slimmer bezels and dynamic island on 14 Pro, then even slimmer bezels on 15 Pro, and now on the 16 Pro you will be getting even slimmer bezels and in a larger screen. Josephat Guerrero joining the screen saying you'll be upgrading from the 11 Pro Max. As I'm telling, there's still a ton of people on 10, 10s, 11. There's a reason why there was some backlash that like the iPhone 10 isn't getting supported anymore. It's because a lot of people still use those kinds of devices. You love the great battery life, believe me. Like, even without normalizing use case, the 16 Pro will give you already as good battery life, but giving you more, right? Higher processing power, everything loads faster, faster 5G, faster Wi-Fi, obviously all the improvements across speakers, cameras, microphones, USB-C, and then of course, if you actually try to normalize it, right, maybe instead of like running the screen at 1,000 nits or like 1,200 nits of indoor brightness, we aren't even talking about outdoor brightness, run it at 500 or 600 nits, which is also much better for your eyes most of the time. Or hell, a lot of us run screens indoor at like 300 or 400 nits. And now you will see enormous advantages over the 11 Pro. And then, of course, there's so much else beyond that. And then, of course, there's also the fact that your 11 Pro Max, even if you changed its battery mid life cycle, you're probably already like now going down with the battery capacity already. And if you kept always the same battery, which a lot of people do, now you would be at 80%, maybe even below that when it comes to battery capacity. Now you're getting such a huge increase, and that older phone is still not worthless. This is why I'm always asking, like, sometimes I actually like not improving like an older device, like, oh, changing its battery or fixing like whatever small button is loose or whatever. I'll just keep that old phone as a secondary device. And to me, that's not wasteful. I have enough usage for a secondary device. Especially since I also have multi-SIM for my carriers. So yeah, it will be an amazing upgrade for you, Josephat. You've replaced the screen twice and the battery once. Well, you will be getting definitely a much, much nicer experience here. Especially, I apologize. Especially since once you also like repaired a device so many times, you will feel some of that in the device. It just doesn't feel quite the same. You spent a whole iPhone's worth maintaining this device. Exactly. This is why I'm trying to tell people, like, it's not like iPhone users are wasteful, right? And they don't want to repair their device at all. It's just that sometimes it doesn't make sense financially. And even if you had to spend like half an iPhone's worth, right? At that point, you could say, well, if I pay like half an iPhone's worth on top of that, then I buy myself a new iPhone, and that iPhone will hopefully not need replacements and any kind of repairs, things like that. New iPhones are also more durable. They're now easier to repair. Things like screen replacements are like repairs that involve like the back. They're actually now cheaper because Apple redesigned like the internals with the iPhone 14 and on. Again, I could go on and on, but basically, you are getting a much nicer screen at regardless from which iPhone you are upgrading. But obviously, like, to me as an iPhone 15 Pro users who already gets like 1,000 nits of brightness indoors, 2,000 nits of brightness outdoors, yes, those brightness levels are difficult to sustain given some of the limited cooling that Apple provides, unfortunately, but it's still nice to have it. It's like like a short burst almost. Next is also something that Josephat will interest you, and that is that we might have not just a better battery in the new iPhone Pro series, but actually with it better battery life. Now, we have seen some rumors about battery capacities on the iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. Some of them going up to like almost 3,600 milliampere hours from like 3,300 on the 16 Pro, and then going from around 4,400 to 4,700 on the Pro Max. So around a sub 10% improvement in raw capacity. And we were talking about, well, how would that be achieved, right? And this is going from Minchi Kuo claims. Now, this is actually to me very interesting, and I'm very inclined to believe that, because like a metal chassis battery was like part of the discussions from when we started talking about improved cooling, right? So basically, the rumor goes when it comes to cooling for the iPhone 16 series is that both the iPhone 16 and the 16 Pro, which also involves like the Plus and the Pro Max models and whatever, they will all get graphene cooling and just in general better cooling for the actual chip, which in this case would be like A18 or A18 Pro. Now, we haven't yet had leaks on what the exact differences will be. My speculation at this point is simply that A18 is a bin down version of the A18 Pro, and that it doesn't get all the same features in the camera because also the sensors are worse, so Apple just withholds some of them artificially for the Pro series. I've previously also speculated that the A18 might actually have worse memory bandwidth, but that was when I believed that the memory bandwidth would see like a 35 to 50% boost, given that we know from the M4 that Apple is now using 7,500 megatransfers RAM memory. I'm inclined to believe that both A18 and A18 Pro will use the same memory. But that's neither here nor there. So the chip is getting better cooled. And the other part of the rumor was that the Pro iPhones would get a battery that cools itself much better through a metal chassis. I believe I put a steel chassis in the thumbnail. I'm actually not sure if that is true. I'm not actually quite certain what the metal is. I don't know why my brain told me it's steel. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not. Let me know if I'm stupid or not. And basically, oh yeah, nice. Kuo said that Apple's adoption of a stainless steel casing for the iPhone's battery will allow for 5 to 10% higher cell density, which does line up with like the 7 to 8% capacity increase rumors, while remaining within safety limits. Now, with safety limits, you of course want some room for your battery due to heat to expand a little bit inside the chassis, because the alternative to that is the Galaxy Note 7 situation, as you guys know. If you make a chassis that is completely fulfilled by the battery, and the battery just cannot get any larger in it, it's almost like the battery breathes a little. That's where it sort of stops. This is where your chassis gets exploded, and then your battery suffers, and then the battery potentially catches fire. And as you guys know, lithium doesn't like to be on fire. Well, it very much likes to be on fire. It's an incredibly highly exothermic reaction. And yeah, I just wanted to say, like, Apple is definitely very much a company that likes to be inside safety standards, when it comes to stuff like that. This is why they've kept like very similar battery capacity for years. And this supposedly with a slightly redesigned internal chemistry, like that will allow for higher cell density, but also supposedly a metal casing is better than the materials we have right now. Now, I'm not an expert on these things, so if you're somebody with any kind of engineering background, let me know. And Angelica, our MarkTech Pro Max member, saying thank you for the stream. My second German supporter, thank you so much for your support and for being here. So this is actually a rumor that to me is very interesting because it doesn't like by itself it sounds like, oh, more battery life, right? But then you think of other improvements, right? The metal will be better at dissipating heat. It might allow for higher peak charging speeds, whether it's for wired to go beyond 27 watts or for wireless to go beyond 15 watts. We've had rumors for wired to go up to like 40 watts and wireless to go up to like 20 watts. So that would be very nice, especially on the Pro Max, where you also have like a pretty nice large device. Maybe that kind of cooling could also like integrate well with like a copper Apple logo, the way we have seen it on the M4 iPad Pro. But there's also, of course, another thing to the battery story, and that is that the EU is kind of on a regulatory overdrive right now. And while I have been I'm not supportive of the DMA itself, but I have said, well, the DMA is already law, right? And with that, I'm kind of inclined to say it is law. The EU itself is a democratic body. It is legitimized through the elections for the European Parliament, and of course the legitimacy that the individual member countries provide to the EU bodies. But there comes a limit to me when you dictate absolutely everything. I'm a big proponent of the free market, at least in the way the world currently exists. Maybe in an ideal world, government full of highly competent people that are experts in every field. Maybe in that world we could have like a planned economy or whatever, not in the world we are living in right now. And to me, this law is interesting because it's not like it's a bad idea, but some devices like smartphones, as impactful as they are in the environment, you also have to consider this is ultimately a device you hold in your hand, right? The amount of energy used to like produce an iPhone like is still relatively small when you compare it to like huge industrial things, like even things like a thermal cooler for like a desktop tower build, right? You have like a 400-gram heavy fan with metal cooling. And to me it's like, yeah, I know that of course iPhones produce a lot of like waste for the batteries and things like that, so it makes sense to regulate them at least somewhat. So I'll be interested to see if it's easy to comply with the law. But what am I even talking about? The new EU law requires smartphone manufacturers to ensure batteries can be replaced by owners using easily accessible tools by 2025. Apple plans to achieve this with the use of electrically induced adhesive debonding technology. Don't ask me what that is. Allowing users to apply a low voltage of electricity to quickly dislodge the battery instead of finicky adhesive strips. Now, Apple has been using a lot of glue historically, then in a move that is much more pro do-it-yourself repairs, they've changed to adhesive strips. And now they're supposedly using like an electricity-based technology, one that will like, with a charge, will like bind the battery to the chassis and then it will release it. God only knows. I certainly don't. This battery replacement method is anticipated to debut in at least one iPhone 16 model. So this is individual. This is separate from the actual like design of this. But I would be surprised if Apple introduced like a brand new battery like designed this way and then didn't bother to comply with the law if that's their plan anyway, right? So if we are getting this on the 16 Pro and Pro Max, and with the better replacement solution, and then the iPhone 17 series will get it across the board, that to me makes a lot of sense, because that's kind of like the kind of trickle down tech solution that Apple likes. It's good for them to advertise longer battery life this year, better charging speeds and whatever on the Pro models. And then next year there will be, I actually believe that the iPhone 17 series with everything else will probably be a huge upgrade overall. You have to understand that it will be like, it's the first iPhone to get like a Pro Motion screen that isn't a Pro iPhone, and now it's supposedly also going to inherit this kind of improved battery from the 16 Pros, might get some of the better camera stuff, not even from the 16 Pro, but like the 15 Pro and whatever. So the 17 series will definitely be an interesting one, but I'm not saying that to distract from the improvements that we're obviously getting with the 16 series. As I always say, there are reasons to be excited about for the future of technology. This is one of those. Again, I cannot guarantee you that the actual capacity will increase, because we've seen some weird rumors about it. Now, this rumor to me, the reason why I'm covering what I'm covering right now is that this is like OLED supply chain. It's like Ross Young leaks that stuff pretty easily, right? Battery, at this point, we usually do know at least the underlying technology for stuff like this. Maybe not always the exact correct battery capacity, or maybe it is that one of those rumors is correct and it's just that because there is contradictory stuff, maybe it's hard to tell. And then there's obviously like rumors that intersect with each other, like, oh, we are getting a new battery. Oh, and Apple is working on a new battery replacement mechanism. The question is that new battery replacement mechanism specifically for this new solution? Or might Apple go like what they did with the iPhone 14, where it was actually the iPhone 14 that was more replaceable and internally almost completely redesigned to allow that better repairability. While the 14 Pro that actually had significantly newer components year to year, that one actually kept a lot of the older chassis design and was not easier to repair. So, and then it was the iPhone 15 Pro that caught up to what the iPhone 14 and iPhone 15 are doing. So maybe it could be that it's actually the old battery design with the non-steel chassis, the non-steel casing, that actually gets that better repairability. And then the year after, we are getting like steel batteries across the board, and now they are also easier to repair and replace. Now, again, I do not have any first-hand knowledge or second-hand knowledge here. Well, does this count as second-hand knowledge, reporting on reports like that? But yeah, to me, it's just interesting that like sometimes we do have rumors that intersect and you don't know if you should cover them separately or not. But because I am not a big repair guy, I never want my device to get worse so it's easier to repair. At that point, I'm like, well, maybe like 1 or 2%, or in some ways, right? Maybe it gets a tiny bit larger, a tiny bit heavier or whatever, but I never want a device that is suddenly not thin, not light anymore, that doesn't have the highest battery capacity it can have actually inside its chassis. As Apple said with like the old MacBooks, part of why they when they moved away from like replaceable batteries to fully built-in ones, that increased battery capacity by 40% or something like that, which actually made the battery much more usable in day-to-day life. And it made the actual device design more appealing and things like that. And that's what customers actually really liked. Customers might theoretically favor devices that are super duper pro, like do it yourself, super pro right to repair, but fundamentally, like, replaceable batteries sort of died in across the rest of the industry. Even like SD card slots are like not even as trendy as they once were. All those things that Apple was criticized for, ultimately people told those companies, yeah, we don't really care that much. There's like a subset of enthusiasts that might want them, but they will never like vote with their wallet and never actually get a smartphone because of it at some point. And some people might be like show offy and say like, look, I'm a tech guy, but I'm keeping like the same smartphone for 5 years and I like replaced its screen 3 times or whatever. Like, that is fine and dandy. Like, for example, Josephat, you mentioned that you like replaced your screen, you replaced your battery, and that is absolutely perfectly fine. But then there are people like Linus from Linus Tech Tips who are making out of this like a performative statement. Look how long I'm making like my Galaxy S, what was it, 9 or 10 last, right? It's like basically completely broken, and in that way he does like videos where he replaces shit about it, repairs it, and I'm like, the amount of extra parts going into it, like, you cannot tell me that you actually think that this is now better for the environment, right? And also for like even like your personal use cases, like you're taking photos of like of your kids and stuff like that. At some point you do want to upgrade. So this discussion always annoys me, and I actually say that, similar to how extreme leftists, right, not people who are like social democrats or like left of center, even far left of center, God knows I am left of center, but then there are like the extreme ones, the ones calling for like revolutions and communism and whatever, without actually having read any of the underlying materials about communism, which I actually have, but it's an entirely different discussion. It's like the people who are always screaming the loudest about how great of a person they are, how much they want to like fix the world and everything in it, are usually some of the least effective ones and some of the biggest assholes. And to me, like, Louis Rossman actually fits that very, very much, who's like a condescending BS artist. And I hate to be so negative, but it's like, oh, I'm so smart, I'm gonna tell huge companies how they should build their devices because I repair them. Dum 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 dum. It's like, bro, like, just say like, oh, I'm for a better. Of course, that's also his persona online, but you know, by the way, that like he does like streams where he isn't acting. It's like, dude, you're very, very full of yourself. And to me, it's just like this discussion of like, oh, we need to overregulate everything. Everything needs to be like user replaceable. Like, the battery inside the current iPhones is not that difficult to replace already. The reason why most people don't want to do it, unless it's super manual, right? The way that, or super automatic almost, the way that it was like with the LG G4 or whatever, I believe it was called, when they introduced like those modules that just swipe in from down. But those things, of course, come with inefficiency when it comes to space usage, how much the device actually weighs, what the actual battery capacity will be, how much cooling you can put on it, things like that. Now, some people will say, well, the ability to easily replace the battery makes up for all those inconveniences, at which point I say like, well, but the iPhone also has like MagSafe batteries. Like, yes, that makes it heavier and things like that, but you can easily put on 2000 milliampere hours on the iPhone, and then you can also use that MagSafe pack still as like a regular battery, and you can have 3 or 4 of them, always put them on the iPhone. Hell, if Apple ever adds like active cooling to the MagSafe battery, that will be phenomenal, because that will fix basically all its issues. So again, not trying to be an asshole here to other assholes. It's just like, with the EU regulating stuff like that, if Apple manages it this way and they have like this electrically induced adhesive debonding stuff and it actually works super easily, then I will be very glad. But there aren't always magical solutions for problems like that. And there will still be issues like how do I actually enter the device, right? Like it's still like going into and trying to detach the glass and whatever and doing it yourself and trying not to crack anything. And then when you put everything back in, making sure that everything is in the right place, that you didn't get any liquids or something like that inside it. I hope Apple manages it well. Apple already is like doing a lot more for the DIY market than they ever used to. Well, not like DIY repair market, not people building devices from the ground up, but people repairing their devices themselves. And with that being said, now I briefly mentioned the A18 chip already. There isn't actually new rumors about it. Similar to the actual camera, which is we don't actually have hardcore new rumors. It's just that it seems like we're getting more and more confirmation from basically every leaker and rumorster, however you want to call them, is that the iPhone 16 Pro is getting two like upgraded cameras in major ways. And in fact, we do have rumors that then the upcoming iPhone 17 Pro will then improve the other two cameras, right? So for one, it does seem like Apple is sticking with a 4-camera setup, basically 3 cameras on the back, 1 camera on the front, at least for the Pro. At least the regular 16 will likely stay with a 3-camera setup, with 2 on the back, 1 on the front. And it seems like the 17 generation is not going to change that status quo. It's just going to keep improving the individual cameras. And that's what the 16 Pro is doing as well. Now, the iPhone 15 Pro actually didn't change that much about the camera hardware. It utilized a much better image signal processor in the A17 Pro and the new smart HDR algorithm to actually greatly boost camera quality sometimes, but not through hardware. The main camera improvement with the 15 Pro was the optical 5x zoom on the 15 Pro Max. Speaking of that, one of those improvements will actually be it's an improvement that already exists, but it's an improvement that doesn't exist yet for all Pro iPhones, and that is that the regular iPhone 16 Pro, so the smaller one, not the Max model, will inherit the 5x optical zoom lens from the 15 Pro Max. Now, there are some contradictory rumors about the 16 Pro Max either keeping that exact same 5x optical setup or going to a super telephoto lens that would move us all the way to like 10x zoom, optical zoom. Now, I haven't heard too much about that rumor recently, but it seems like not to have fully died yet as a rumor. I think if it's true, then it will be true for like a 17 Pro Max or whatever. I don't know, like the 12, even though it's a 12 megapixel sensor and it's not a super large sensor and it doesn't have the widest aperture, because the image signal stability, the optical image stabilization on that zoom camera is actually so phenomenal, it actually delivers pretty good results. Usually, if you're doing a far away zoom, even a small shake of your hand, right, will potentially cause the image to go blurry. Now, not so much on the Pro Max. This is actually an advantage that I believe it very much holds over something like the Galaxy S24 Ultra, which has a 5x zoom, but on a slightly larger 50 megapixel sensor versus Apple's 12 megapixel sensor, which means in perfect conditions, it delivers slightly better like sharpness in daylight, but then in low light, it just gets completely completely destroyed by Apple, and anything that where it's a little shakier, then it's also an advantage for the iPhone. Also, the iPhone does a better job in actually like keeping image quality, or at least like camera signs, very consistent between the individual cameras. I believe that this new, like the 5x camera on the S24 Ultra does look notably different. Now, this is the speculative improvement, right? So basically, the 16 Pro is guaranteed to get a better zoom, but the 16 Pro Max is rumored to potentially get an even better zoom. If the later rumor is actually true, that would bring us to 3 of the 4 cameras being improved, but that one is a little bit more iffy. That one is less clear. What is much more clear is the use of larger image sensors. For the main camera specifically, we would be moving from a 1 by 1.28 inch sensor. Like, you can think of that like as a divide, right? So actually, like, the smaller the second number, the larger the sensor overall. So that would be an improvement already from the larger sensor. Obviously, a larger sensor can work with more light. It would still be a 48 megapixel sensor, so the actual pixels are also larger. And it's a newer generation sensor, specifically designed to improve low light performance, which is obviously very, very much appreciated. Now, that being said, I'm not blowing smoke up Apple's ass here. We do have solutions with even larger sensors, like a full 1 inch sensor. It's like 1 by 1 by 0.98, but that being said, in real world, this actually outperforms this. So now, yes, probably sometimes in like still photos in like night, without night mode, I would say these 1 inch main cameras on the Chinese devices might outperform the iPhone, simply based on the fact that they have a larger sensor and things like that. But then all the cameras, the color science is superior to me on the iPhone. Obviously, the iPhone also has like Pro RAW, which is really, really great to work with without switching to full-on RAW, which is a little bit more of a pain to work with. It gives you a very easy way to access the full resolution of the sensor, while still being super fast to work with to actually capture the image. The focus on the iPhone is generally better whenever it can also rely on like its LiDAR scanner on the back. So again, not trying to downplay how good some of the recent like Chinese cameras are, and this isn't like designed to be like crapping on the likes of Xiaomi, because I will be crapping on somebody else pretty soon. I just wanted to mention, whenever people just try to, like, if you're looking at the same like smartphone manufacturer, right, and you're talking about them using like a, let's say, by a 1 by 1.3 inch sensor, right? And now they're saying, well, it's a better sensor, it's a larger sensor, right? And we are using even more advanced like image processing. It's very likely to be better. But once you start comparing completely different operating systems here, the different algorithms, things like that, now even if they use actually like a superior, newer Sony sensor, sometimes they use their own sensors, which is a little bit iffy too, because nobody beats Sony right now when it comes to like smartphone sensors. Uh, which is all the more ironic because Sony's own smartphone cameras suck. So yeah, I just wanted to say, you cannot just say larger sensor here means better. With a larger sensor, there also come other issues, like because of the small optics on top of a relatively large sensor, it becomes harder to do edge-to-edge sharpness. It also becomes harder to go go up close with a new subject, right? This is, for example, why macro mode actually became as big of a thing with the iPhone 14 Pro as it ultimately did, and that's because I apologize, but the very large sensor, or by that time, a very large sensor, which is the same size on the 14 Pro, was actually worse than the previous 13 Pro or 12 Pro at coming up close to a subject that you wanted to take a photo of. So what Apple did is they allowed the ultra wide to turn on whenever you actually get that close, and because the ultra wide, with how its optics works, gets things into focus much easier. That's what we got. Now, that doesn't solve the underlying problem that you do want sometimes to get up close to a subject with your actual main sensor, but it is a little bit of a workaround. And if you are super duper too ambitious with like your main sensor and you go to 1 inch or more and you don't adjust the optics accordingly, and to be perfectly fair, some of those Xiaomi devices and whatever are actually pretty good at managing it. But sometimes you do that and you don't really get great results. In fact, Samsung is rumored, and I will be shitting on them here a little bit, Samsung is rumored to be keeping basically the same 200 megapixel primary rear camera. Now, it should be noted, it might seem like, oh, 200 megapixels, it has to be huge. Well, no, it's actually slightly smaller, basically imperceptibly smaller, but technically it's a 1 by 1.32 inch sensor, so it's technically a little smaller than the main sensor on the iPhone 14 Pro or the 15 Pro. And this will be like a slightly better version of that sensor that like better handles low light, but that sensor already wasn't great at capturing subjects up close. This is why Samsung also offered macro mode on its ultra wide camera. And in fact, when Samsung first started switching to like crazy 100 megapixel sensors, those sensors in the beginning were actually really, really bad, in my opinion. Like on the Galaxy S21 and stuff, like not only did the processors have problems keeping up with that kind of compute demand, but you really, really had like issues with things like shutter lag. It was like the sensor itself wasn't even really fast enough to process that many pixels. So that was a real issue. Now, it's gotten better over time. We've obviously compromised on some stuff, and Samsung isn't even leading in any individual camera spec anymore. Now they are going to be making up for some of them with like 50 megapixel ultra wide camera up from 12 megapixel, a 50 megapixel telephoto on the 3X, which currently is a 10 megapixel sensor, a completely old crappy one, and they will be keeping that new 5X sensor, which is and the weird thing is that when you actually look at it, where was it? S25 Ultra camera specs. Because there were like rumors recently that the actual like 50 megapixel on the ultra wide would not actually be getting larger, that it would be getting higher megapixel count, but not actually increase the sensor size. The 3X telephoto camera is supposed to get a 1 by 3 inch isocell sensor that is larger than the current S24 Ultra sensor. That makes sense. That sensor was atrocious, and 1 by 3 inches is still not big. And then the ultra wide, yes, this is where I'm trying to tell you guys. Whenever companies advertise with big numbers, always question it. So the claim here is that the ultra-wide lens will have a version of the 1 by 2.7 inch 6 sensor, which is actually slightly smaller than the S24 Ultra, but it does have a higher resolution. this to me is so freaking terrible, because the entire point of more megapixels, it's not like the pixels have to be like the pixels itself will be getting smaller, but the idea is if you combine then 4 pixels into one, 50 megapixels is supposed to give you larger, like 12.45 megapixel images, right? Pixel binning, basically. And now, by using a slightly smaller sensor, you aren't even getting that. So why not even keep 12 megapixels? Now, I know that maybe the generation here of the of the sensor is actually much better. Who knows? I'm very skeptical. I think Samsung is desperate to save some money on the production on the Ultras, because they have trouble like making them, like they're making profits here, but you have to understand they went with titanium chassis for the reason that the iPhone went with the titanium chassis, without having like Apple's like decades of metallurgical expertise when it comes to like, no, well, I don't want to shit on Samsung here, but this is specific to Samsung Mobile. Samsung Mobile has always tried new material. They've had ceramic backs, they've had titanium chassis before that, right? But they never ever committed to stuff like this. Now Apple goes with titanium, actually advertises the material way more than they ever did with the stainless steel chassis, and now Samsung has to basically double the price of their actual chassis. Of course, Samsung still has to keep around the S Pen because they were stupid enough to kill the Note series. So now they have to also like find space and find money with the production of the Ultra to fit the S Pen in there, to also still keep funding research and development to improving the S Pen year over year, at least somewhat. And then with everything else, given that they are actually more space constrained than other manufacturers, because they do have the S Pen right in there, now they have to find solutions how their 5,000 milliampere hour battery, for one, it's already behind the likes of OnePlus 12, which are like at 5,400 milliampere hours. But you also still have to make sure that you never get into a Galaxy Note 7 situation, because whenever Samsung decides to increase battery capacity, well, their internal space in the chassis, unless they decide to make the chassis thicker and the device heavier, well, that space is limited, and that money has to also be paid for somehow. So this is why you get weird solutions like this, where it's like, well, we do have a 50 megapixel ultra wide, but it's even actually a smaller sensor than before. And oh, we do have like 2 telephoto cameras, but don't expect those to be like very interesting. Like I expected Samsung to actually have like variable zoom, which is what like Sony has on their cameras, which like between like 4 and 6x or something like that, you can actually zoom in like and the actual camera hardware will make that into optical zoom. Samsung has 2 optical zoom cameras. One is 3 megapixel, which, okay, 3 megapixel is a useful distance. And then a 5 megapixel, which is way too close to 3x. At that point, you might as well just use a much, much larger sensor on the 3x. And then do, like, for one, you do have the option to go from a 50 megapixel image to a 12 megapixel image, which would already be 6x. And then you just use the larger camera size to also still look good at like 8x or something like that. And by a 3x optical zoom, they would also have far fewer problems with the optical image stabilization, which becomes more and more of an issue like the further away like your optical zoom is. So this is at this point, like it looks like they're actually, oh look, Samsung is giving you 250 megapixel zoom cameras, Apple is only giving you like 112 megapixel ones. And then you actually look at the individual specs here and you're like, yeah, I kind of prefer Apple's solution, or actually like Pixel solution is also pretty good, right? And this to me is just an insult. And again, when I say like, oh, I'm sorry guys, after a lot of work, like my voice Um, but like with the 200 megapixel main camera, right, you have a sensor that at that point will be smaller than a 2 generation old iPhone, right, the 14 Pro. And this is why like Samsung is rumored to at some point would go all the way up to a full 1 inch sensor. But then the question will be again, are they actually improving the rest of the hardware along with it? Because with how crappy the rest of their sensors are, especially now with the ultra wide not even getting a larger sensor, what will the color science look like and everything like that if there is such a big disparity between the individual cameras? At that point, why do we need 4 cameras? Why waste space? Why waste resources, money on that? Just give us 3 cameras that are all individually much better. Or hell, if you get to a solution with variable zoom, you might at some point even give us just 2 cameras, but both of them being like a full inch sensor in size. This is the kind of innovation you kind of expected Samsung to deliver. Because I would say I have no problem saying that Samsung leads Apple when it comes to raw specifications, right? It's usually that Apple integrates those much better, executes on them better, at least in a similar time frame, right? Samsung over time, of course, catches up too. But Samsung does have fantastic like OLED screens, but the way they're integrating them into their product, they still are behind the 14 Pro in peak brightness. Now, they have had a great solution on the S24 Ultra for outdoor brightness, which is a much, much better anti-reflective coating. And in fact, it's rumored that Apple will be utilizing a similar thing on either the 16 Pro or the 17 Pro. So I give Samsung some kudos here. Samsung used to be industry leading when it comes to memory and storage. Now, like, while they use technically some of the fastest solutions out there, it's not like their chip is even cooled well enough to even utilize all of that all the time. And of course, there's the issue that Samsung, while previously being like a big leader in memory capacity, nowadays it's just like par for the course with everyone else, and actually worse than Chinese counterparts that give you all as much that like OnePlus gives you up to 24 gigabytes of memory. Those are the kind of things where I would expect Samsung to lead Apple just on the spec sheet, and then I would actually accept why Samsung's S24 Ultra is more expensive than Apple's iPhone 15 Pro Max in their base configurations. But I don't know. Like Samsung just isn't the old Samsung anymore. Like I think it's actually catching up with them how many devices they are producing, right? Given that like the A50 series is actually I believe like their best seller or whatever, I honestly think that they are just so obsessed with not losing too much ground to the Chinese manufacturers, and they look at the US at like 20% of the market there, and they look at like at 30% of the European market, and they believe that those markets are basically captured, right? The people there are buying Samsung because they are the people in those markets that don't want iPhone, and everyone else will just buy Motorola, cheap Chinese phones, because Europe actually allows them to come into the region while the US mostly doesn't. And yeah, I just think that a lot of the hubris that people usually talk about with Apple, I would say it much more applies with Samsung, especially since Apple hasn't actually increased like the base price on the iPhone Pro. Yeah, sure, they have increased that on the Pro Max, but once you consider like just how many improvements those devices had, and the fact that like I believe the titanium that Apple is using, for example, on the 15 Pro is like 3 times or something more expensive than what Samsung is using. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. That was like a jerry rig everything analysis. And yeah, you can argue, well, what am I benefited by with the titanium? I'm like, well, you aren't losing anything either because the iPhone's actually cheaper. I can see the criticism for Apple on like the non-Pro iPhones, right? They don't have promotion, they don't have 3 cameras or whatever. But that is because Apple also has a captured market, which is people who want iPhone because whatever, green bubbles, bought into the App Store, bought into iCloud, all that jazz. They buy phones for their kids, for spouses that aren't as tech savvy and whatever. And this is basically an iPhone for people who don't really want to pay actual iPhone prices, because to me, the actual iPhone is always the Pro. It's where the most work goes in from Apple. It's where, if you look back to like the original like iPhone 2G, right, the OG iPhone, you will actually find that that is that is actually in price in line with what the newer iPhones are. It was a $500 device with a 2-year carrier contract. So very, very much a over $1,000 device, whatever you ended up doing. And I just find it fascinating how people are like, well, Apple is lazy. And I'm still getting the same Galaxy S Ultra every year. Supposedly, the S25 Ultra will be getting a much more rounded design, but I've only seen like one leaker talk about it yet, so we'll see if that actually turns out true. Now, obviously, so we have talked about the telephoto camera, right? We've talked about the telephoto camera on the iPhone 16 Pro getting the 5x telephoto from the 15 Pro Max, and supposedly maybe the 16 Pro Max getting an even crazier telephoto solution. We've talked about the main sensor on, well, it's actually weird because I've seen some rumors that this might be just an improvement for the 16 Pro Max, but everything that I've seen in like more reliable rumors point to this coming to the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max, so that's nice. So it's a larger sensor from a 1 by a 1.28 to a 1 by 1.14, which actually would be quite a nice jump, because this is like a 0.14 improvement. And if Apple ever wants to go full 1 inch, that's basically the same difference. I know that's not quite how the math works, but it's just funny how the numbers look. And a newer sensor too, much more competitive, like on a raw spec perspective, with like Chinese competitors, obviously kicking the ever-living crap out of whatever Samsung is doing right now. And the ultra wide will be improving on the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max, going for the first time from a 12 megapixel sensor all the way up to 48 megapixels, which would only leave the 5x telephoto, now a 12 megapixel sensor on the back, and then a 12 megapixel front facing camera. And supposedly the iPhone 17 generation is when we're getting a 20 megapixel front camera and a 48 megapixel zoom camera. So in 2 years, basically, with the iPhone 16 Pro and 17 Pro generation, every single camera will be improved, not just through a new chip or new HDR processing, but actually through new camera hardware over my 15 Pro Max. So this is also partially why, like, I, for example, have started taking a little bit more selfies than I used to. Anybody who follows me on Twitter knows that I have been historically very anti-selfie, but that has changed somewhat. And I would be very much inclined to like wait until we get a much better front-facing camera too. And supposedly we're getting a larger sensor, a 24 megapixel sensor versus a 12 megapixel sensor right now. So that would be very nice, obviously. And yeah, the ultra wide is the one where I'm also pretty excited about, because I do use ultra wide on my 15 Pro Max, but the camera quality isn't always great, and I do like macro shots too, and obviously those are powered by the ultra wide. Supposedly this isn't like a megapixel increase in the way we've discussed it with Samsung, but we are actually getting a larger sensor here as well. Now on the regular iPhone 16, we've already talked about it. We will be getting a vertical camera layout. You can see that for yourself. It's in my thumbnail too. And I've already mentioned the A18 plenty here. So the A18 would be like getting like the CPU from the M4, but I also would believe that it will be getting like media encoders and image signal processors that are in line to like manage these better cameras. And the other hardware thing that will be better for the camera itself is a new physical camera button that would sit actually below the power button and would be like similar in size. It will be like a recessed button, and supposedly it will be like haptic, like 3D. Basically, you click like force touch. You click on it softly for focus, the way you do with like a DSLR, and then you click on it forcefully again, and that's when it takes the image. Supposedly, you will be able to like swipe up and down on it to like further zoom in or out, or change the focus. Apple already has their Final Cut camera app, which I believe would actually go very, very much in line with that, because that one does give you more like pro controls. And I wouldn't be surprised if Apple finally, by default, gave us the option to have like more pro control over the stills camera. Right now we have that option for video with the Final Cut camera app. Obviously we've had like the DaVinci Resolve, the Blackmagic camera app and whatever, and other pro solutions over the years. Some of them were paid for, some of them are free, and now we're getting first party solutions directly from Apple. So I'm very, very much looking forward to those camera improvements. The things like the capture button might actually convince me to temporarily buy the 16 Pro, just so I can use it for a week, maybe review it for you guys on the channel, and then actually like also like test out stuff that is like, you know, like actually new hardware, because obviously like the action button was new and I use it right now for a camera. So now that would actually free me up to use my action button for other shortcuts and whatever I want. Basically, maybe just like reprogram it back to mute unmute, because now the capture button will be the king for like physical camera buttons. And I just find it funny because like I've mentioned things like replaceable batteries and like SD card slots and whatever. Oh, and of course headphone jacks, some of which have gone almost away fully, some partially on Android competitors. And it's funny that Apple is now the company that is bringing back like physical buttons. When you actually think about it, right? Now, the action button, I've always criticized it from launch that it's only like workable from a long press. I think it should have a double click functionality that would give you like 2 features, but combined with actually Apple's Shortcuts app, even just one press already gives you a ton of options. I know Android has something similar to shortcuts, but Apple's is usually much better supported. I also find it way easier to use. Then Apple has like the back tap gesture where you can like double or triple tap on the back. So again, another 2 shortcuts that you can program. And now if you are somebody like me who uses the action button for camera shortcuts, well, now you can rely on all of that with the capture button. It probably will give you also like easy ways to know whether you're invoking the stills camera or the video camera right away. So that's almost like 2 camera shortcuts in one. And of course, all the gesture controls, you can actually hold your phone almost like a mini DSLR. So these rumors now, I feel like they're actually taking shape for a final product, right? We've heard about the camera improvements. We've heard about the capture button. We now have the Final Cut camera app. So this gives us actually a small understanding of the kind of different camera experience Apple might be targeting. we've talked about Apple, of course, wanting to give us stuff like higher battery capacity. Now we know that in the context of like having a stainless steel casing for the battery, and supposedly new chemistry, and also like we've had rumors about like stacked batteries, and now we also have, of course, the EU laws that will come into effect next year, and maybe all of that is part of like a big battery redesign that will give you larger capacities, better charging abilities, and of course, those abilities also nicely combined with rumors about improved cooling in general, like the fact that the A18 and A18 Pro chips will be getting graphene heat pads similar to what the M4 iPad Pro got. And speaking of things that are better cooled, either because there's hardware for that to cool or because they're much more efficient, the M14 OLED screens are not just brighter, and also, I believe I forgot almost to mention it, they promise much longer longevity, which OLED materials degrade over time, especially on certain subpixels. And supposedly this one is much better for that. But also, you don't just achieve higher brightness because, well, this is material that gets brighter. It's also primarily because the efficiency of those materials, it has improved. So again, a nice cohesive story now where the iPhone 16 Pro is getting better components, more efficient components, is cooling them better. So we might actually get a huge quality of life improvements of even the 15 Pro, of course, much more so over the 14 Pro, 13 Pro, the 12 Pro series. So it might actually be that the gap between the non-Pro and the Pro iPhones is larger than ever. And maybe Apple will use that to also increase the base price of the 16 Pro to $1,100, while it's currently at 128 gigabytes and $1,000. As we know, the 15 Pro Max jumped from $1,100 to $1,200, and in doing so also gave us 256 gigabytes of base storage. I think that would be a good move for the base Pro 2. I don't know what that would mean for if Apple might want to like increase prices to like $1,300 on the Pro Max, because that's just such an like highly seeked model right now. And as I've mentioned, that is the base price of the S24 Ultra that will lag so far behind technologically. And then the S25 Ultra will improve on the S24 Ultra in many ways, but as I've mentioned, maybe not quite as many ways as some people expected. So Apple could probably get away with a $1,300 base price for the Pro Max. But we will obviously talk about that once we cross that bridge with the official announcements, or if we get leaks and rumors from reliable sources about pricing. Now, this basically wraps it up for this video. I will be adding timestamps to it when I get to it, maybe not right away. Thank you to anyone who joined, to anyone who watched. I know that this is basically a recap video, but it is an important one because I do think it paints quite a cohesive picture about what we should expect with the 16 Pro generation. I think nothing in there is crazy, right? Because sometimes when we talk about like 2-year-off iPhones, or even like the latest rumors about AirPods supposedly getting infrared cameras, so you could do like gestures in the air or whatever. I always tell people to take them with a grain of salt, even if they come from reliable sources, because even reliable sources might sometimes get tricked by not because somebody lied to them, but maybe they were listening to rumors about prototypes and not actual devices. And maybe they have heard about a device that might go into production, but that might have like a 10, 15, 20% probability chance, right? So they report on it, but they lack the context of knowing that, oh, Apple's own engineers know that it's not very likely to go into actual production. We just play around with it. We want to know how that technology behaves on that specific product. Now, there will be obviously obviously like big scale projects at Apple that sometimes don't pan out, like the Apple car, but there will be hundreds of smaller, like individual technologies, one device getting thinner, lighter, or specific tech from another device that Apple prototypes, but it never comes true. And I just wanted to say, now that we are much closer, like 2-3 months, to the 16 Pro series, now I'm actually starting to feel pretty confident about the rumors we are talking about, especially since none of them are particularly crazy over the 15 Pro. Of course, if we were talking about like a stainless steel casing for the battery 2.5 years ago, I would have said, well, it might not, right? It might depend on how easy it is to produce logistically, how expensive it gets. But now that we're so much closer to it and these rumors are still persisting, I will be much more inclined to believe them. Now, that doesn't mean that always comes true. Obviously, we kind of expected the 14 Pro series to adopt USB-C. Then it was only the 15 series that actually did it. So some rumors, even from reliable sources, even close to the actual announcements, might still be wrong. But I am reporting on what is out there, and I am trying to be careful to not feed you guys garbage that I myself don't believe in at all. So that about wraps it up for this video. As always, I want to remind you guys, please subscribe to the channel to help us grow the community. Please like the videos, because obviously that helps tremendously with the algorithm. Share it out to family or friends who you think might enjoy it. And of course, comment. I always like me a lively live chat. Today was a little bit more subdued, but that's perfectly fine. It was a very spontaneous stream. But of course, as always, please also comment on the actual video once it has been uploaded, because that obviously helps too. And if you catch me live and you want to support this channel directly, leave a super chat or a super sticker. And if you want to support this channel directly, you can either subscribe to my channel now on YouTube monetarily. There's a MarkTech Pro and a MarkTech Pro Max tier, or you can do the same on Patreon. Shout out to Angelica, as a MarkTech Pro Max subscriber on YouTube, and a shout out to Louis God, who is my MarkTech Pro Max supporter on Patreon. So thank you to anyone who ever decides to, like, of course, just watch the videos, but of course, if you want to give some direct support, that is very much appreciated. With all of that out of the way, thank you so much for all your continued support. As always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next, and I see you guys next time. This is MarkTech, tuning out.